So my product empire came about just out of necessity. When I came from stand-up comedy into the speaking world, I joined the National Speakers Association, and all I heard of over and over again was, you gotta have a book, you gotta have a book, you gotta have a book. Well, I don't even like to read. I'm dyslexic. So the thought of writing a book was so far out of my comfort zone. But I kept hearing over and over, this is what you gotta do. So fortunately, for me, Rick Siegel was the chapter president of the National Speakers Association New England, and he came to me. He was working on this project with someone else. They had creative differences, so he asked me, he said, would you write this book with me, Laugh and Get Rich? And I'm like, okay, so I get a co-author, somebody who's going to teach me and walk me through the process. I'll do it. And so I created this self-published book, Laugh and Get Rich. And that was my first product. And then as my career evolved in the National Speakers Association, even though I was a wannabe comedian and I was maybe an opener at best, not even a middle act, because of the credibility of doing stand-up, which scares speakers to death, people would come to me, well, how do I add humor to my speech? How do I get to be funnier? I'm like, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure this out. But what I realized is there was this huge need and desire for speakers to be funnier. And even though I didn't have the answers they were looking for, I started realizing, well, how can I help them? How can I help them? Well, I knew the best humorists in NSA in the New England area and the best comedians in the New England area because I was working with them. I was opening for them. So as a result, I thought, well, most people who are coming to me to ask questions don't know these people. So I could maybe help them by interviewing these people. And that's exactly what I did. I realized what Rick and I did when we created the book, Laugh and Get Rich, was we went and we interviewed CEOs who used humor as part of their business plan. So we used their credibility and their stories. We were just the person who gathered the information. So I took the same philosophy and applied it to Learn How the Pros Make Them Laugh, only it was me interviewing, asking the questions, because I was still adamant to figure this out. So I interviewed comedians who were on Evening at the Improv, Caroline's Comedy Hour, Comedy Central, and I did 1 hour interviews, and then I forced myself to edit it down to half-hour interviews, so they were rock solid content. So I allowed the person I was interviewing to go off on tangents, but then I could sit down out of the pressure of the interview and say, okay, what do people need to learn? What do they need to hear? What are the insights that are important? So I put that together for, it's called Learn How the Pros Make Them Laugh. Now, some of you may not even be old enough to remember cassettes. If you're not old enough to know what that is, Google it, you'll figure it out. It's the ancient form of a CD or an MP3. But I did these at home in the old days of cassette to cassette, and I would like put a cassette on, a little dubbing machine was like $400, and I would hit it, and that's how I created it. And then when we moved over to the CD world, I still didn't have a lot of money. I was still living at home with my parents because I was my business debt. But I used to actually print on inkjet the CD labels. You get them at Staples or Office Max, and designed them myself, and you'd have a little applier that you would put the CD label on upside down, it would stick to it, which caused a problem later on when the CD peeled up. Anyway, so my first version was completely made at home. I bought a little shrink wrap machine, and that allowed me to shrink wrap to make it look professional, and it was a long process, but it became something that I could speak for free and help people and give them what they wanted. And at the same time, the more I helped them, as the old Zig Ziglar philosophy goes, the more it would help me, because I would earn an income at that, helping serve my list. So eventually I made the Learn when I could afford it, and I sold enough of them. I put some money aside to have a graphic designer to create a better packaging, even though the information is exactly the same. Well, then, after I won the World Championship of Public Speaking, Rick, my co-author, came to me and said, you got to have a product on speaking. You got to have a product on speaking. And I thought, the world does not need another horrible presentation skills speaker. But Rick was relentless, thank God. And I finally gave in to Rick just to shut him up and said, okay, well, I had been recording my speech each step of the way. So I had recordings of the whole process, and I thought, well, you know what, that make 'em laugh set worked. I'll put it together just to shut them up, and I had the process down. I was learning to make the process expedite it, so I created Speak Like a Champion, and that became my next product. So I shrunk wrapped that at home, and after I won the championship, I was invited to speak in Malaysia, and I had never been out of the country except Canada, but it doesn't really count because you can drive there. And so I got invited to Malaysia, so I packed 23 of these, as many as I could fit into my luggage, and brought them with me. And lo and behold, before I even took the stage, I sold out. And that was a big aha for me. Sometimes we don't see the value that we have that other people want from us, and it took my mentor to help me see that. So as a result of that, that became my #1 revenue stream. And I had that redesigned as well. So that, I took that principle and philosophy, and when I got to know the other world champions, we created a set called The Speaking Secrets of the Champions. So that way each of us would only be responsible for one CD, one program, each of us with our own expertise. For example, David Brooks on the writing, Mark creating a speech step by step, mine was humor. And so it was a way that we could joint venture almost, share the cost of artwork and initial production, and then whatever we sold, we kept. And that led to my next program, which kept coming to me. Ed Tate, fellow world champion, said, Darren, when you get off stage, especially in the speaking world, people are going to want to do what you do, get paid to speak. So I started hearing that enough, just like he said, that I took a couple months off and I created Get Paid to Speak by Next Week, because I realized that's what people wanted. And I didn't have time to just answer that question. So what I did is I created and thought back and went through my whole NSA experience. And when I created this, I was also starting to do real estate on the side. And so I had invested in a lot of real estate programs, and I laid out the books and the workbooks that I like best, that were simple and clear. And I had them in front of me, and I thought, okay, I need a workbook to go with this. I like the simplicity of that. I like this idea. I like the fill in the blanks of this. And I created and formulated what I thought was best. And anyway, it's kept perpetuating from there. When I realized what people kept coming to me is, how do I write a speech? I had a lot of products on delivery and different aspects. So I teamed up with Patricia Fripp to create your keynote by next week. And now I'm working on storytelling, because that's one of the missing links. So I think if you're trying to build your product empire, it really came from, what do people want from me? What are they asking for? And then giving them that. So that's a little background on my product story, and it's never going to end. It's going to continually go, and then changing formats because technology's changing. So one step at a time, though, if you're starting to build your information empire, start with what you're hearing people want, and always be open and listening to the questions they ask you, because that's the key to building your product empire.